Hello and welcome to Dave Makes Stuff. This week I've been getting on with stuff, like changing the driver's front wheel bearing, which was spectacularly wobbly. But this isn't a how-to channel, it's more of a how-not-to channel most of the time, so I won't bore you with me clouting things with a hammer. Well, not the bearing at least. What I can show you though is how to do a compression test on a how-not-to channel. Julia's making a start already, first removing a coil pack and then taking out the spark plug. The general idea here is to check the health of the engine that we spent forever installing. So the basic principle is simple. You take out the spark plugs, then you screw in a pressure gauge into each cylinder in turn, you crank the engine to measure the highest pressure achieved, and if they're all similar you've probably got a good engine. Broadly speaking, the higher the pressure, the better state the engine's in. There we go, first spark plug out so the pressure gauge can go in. If your spark plug had a left-hand thread you'd screw it in this way, which it doesn't, so we'll screw it in the other way. Doesn't need to be excessively tight. Looks like some dad eyebrows communication going on here, but goodness knows why. That's in and solid. Time to crank the engine. And here we illustrate that the battery's more or less flat. Let's try this again with a charger on it. This is a bit more like it. You can see the engine pumping the gauge up in a few steps until it eventually settles out at maximum cylinder pressure. Having read that off at about 160 psi, we can depressurise it and unscrew it. So with cylinder 1 out of 4 done, Julia's stacking the spark plug somewhere that we're going to remember which one it is, obviously in a neatly labelled cardboard holder, because I'm organised like that, and then it's on to number 2. Spark plugs aren't put into silly talks, so once it's broken loose it can be spun out quite quickly. Significantly quicker if I speed the footage up 4 times, but you get the picture. And as the first time, spark plug out, pressure gauge in, wind it in at warp speed until it's hand tight and no more, and here we go. Crank the engine over a few times until the pressure stops climbing, and we've got exactly the same reading as last time, which is just what we want to see. So that's 2 down, 2 to go, depressurise it, and we can unscrew it again. Well, I say we, clearly I mean Julia, because I'm standing here holding the camera. Julia, in the meantime, is demonstrating that with 18 months experience she can do this every bit as well as I can with years, which either says great things about her abilities or says all you need to know about mine. Got to be the former, obviously. Though in all seriousness, if you do suspect you might have worn piston rings or a leaking head gasket, I hope you now realise you've got no excuse for not checking it yourself. The tester costs about £25 and the job takes about half an hour. Here we go with number 3. This time we're just a fraction higher at perhaps 170 psi, but that's fine. What I'm really looking for in this test is either 1 or 2 cylinders significantly lower than the rest. On the old engine, one of the bores was cracked, and the piston had run over the cracks and worn out its piston rings, so instead of compressing the air it was leaking past the piston. The compression test gave about 110 psi, while the other 3 were all about 160. A low reading is a sign of a leak, perhaps past worn rings, or through a valve, or through the head gasket. And if 2 adjacent cylinders are low, then you might have a head gasket leaking from one into the other. If you're watching this because you've got some nasty symptoms, I hope you get well soon. If you're watching this because your engine's got some nasty symptoms, my commiserations, especially if it's an Audi TT. They're an absolute bear to get the engine out of, so hopefully it's just a head gasket. Don't ask me how I know this, watch my videos instead, I need the clicks. And there we go, 160 psi, 4 out of 4. So while the engine may very well be on the verge of exploding for some other reason, its compression does look pretty good. Just need to put it all back together now. Next we're going to move on to something else which is pretty straightforward to do at home, or in fact anywhere. We're going to run a diagnostic check on the car. So we'll start with a cheap knockoff cable from eBay. That has a USB port on one end and plugs into this OBD2 port in the footwell on the other end. Kept trying to call it the ODB port. He was one of the Wu-Tang Clan. Ask your grandparents. Anyhow. Cable goes in that port like this. You'll notice the ignition was on in the last shot, so we'll turn it on again here for emphasis. Very important the ignition is on, therefore. It's really quite straightforward once everything's plugged in and set up. Julia's just going to hit auto scan, tell it what car we've got, and then it'll do the rest itself. I have edited out all of the shouting and banging my head and all the rest of it that I did before I realised that you really do need to have it plugged in before you try to set it up, or it just won't play at all. And the end result is a long list of fault codes, which is not too surprising. What it mostly says is you've turned the engine on while all sorts of sensors are unplugged. Because this is the shareware version that the fine folks at Rostec offer for free download, it doesn't tell you what all of the fault codes are, but you can find them easily enough on the internet. One it did flag was, "You've not plugged in one of the injectors, you numpty." Yes, there is. I'm sure there's a special code for numpty. So at least the misfire that we were having was benign and down to an idiot mechanic. And then once fixed, it sounded a bit more like this. So yeah, even on what's had to be a quiet week for outside life reasons, we've made some progress. It should be mobile under its own power soon, and then we can start getting it road legal and have some fun with it. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one.